Today I'm speaking with Ursula Schneider. Ursula, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. We've been trying to do this for a while, so I'm glad we finally connected. Ursula's originally from Florida, and she and her husband Jeremy now live in Tucson, Arizona. That's on my bucket list of places to visit someday, that whole part of the country. They have 4 grown kids and 7 grandkids, and you're a fine artist, which I'm amazed by. I love that skill set. And if you were going to add musician, I would say that's the other one I want to copy. But she's a fine artist working in the mediums of soft pastel, watercolor, gouache, cassine, and acrylic, as well as ink and graphite, and a mixture of all of them known as mixed media. She's also an art instructor at the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum Art Institute, as well as an occasional guest instructor at other locations. Her work is regularly on display at her local art gallery called the Desert Artisans Gallery, where she's a member, marketing director, and salesperson. She's also an aspiring writer. She just submitted a contribution to a collection of deconversion stories and hopes one day to write her own book. Her personal passion in life is to learn and grow and to empower others to do the same. And her own practice involves a lot of reading on a wide variety of subjects with art, the natural world, and psychology themes. You can find her on Instagram and Facebook. I'll have the links for that beneath this video, so please do check her out, like and subscribe and all that. Besides what I know about you so far, Ursula, tell us more about yourself.
Well, you might get a little jealous of me, but I am a vocalist, Tim. So
Oh, nice.
I I can't play an instrument to save my life, but I spent many, many years as a vocalist, and I do enjoy singing quite a bit. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
And is there anything else you want to add in terms of quirky things or hobbies?
So I live in the desert. So I actually live in Vail, which is southeast of Tucson, but nobody's ever heard of it, and they all confuse it with Colorado.
Yeah, I was gonna
But
say.
So Vail is southeast of Tucson, Arizona, and it's just a little, well, it was a rural community. It's been growing, but we've been here 22 years, I think. And we're right at the foot of the Rincon Mountains, and we have some special things here, including the giant saguaro cactus. You've probably seen
Yeah.
the images of saguaro cactus. They're kind of like Dr. Seussian little creatures, and not little, they're enormous. But anyway, one of the things that I like to do is when they die, they decay as you would expect, and they actually have this weird wood skeleton shape inside of them that becomes apparent after all the fleshy stuff kind of falls off. And inside of those is something called a saguaro boot, and it's a callus that is formed when a woodpecker bores a hole into the cactus to create a nesting cavity. And they become quite large. I should have brought one over and I'd show you, but they're like this really weird looking thing. And I actually collect them when I'm out in the desert, in places where it's legal to do so. And so I have this collection of saguaro boots, which look kind of like aliens, honestly, because you get like the inside and the outside. They're really bizarre. So there's a
Mm,
fun fact.
very cool. That is interesting. Yeah, it's that desert world is such a different world from where I'm used to being, and I'm from Pennsylvania and here in Georgia, but I definitely want to see it someday. It's cool. Although I will admit, I'm a little bit concerned about the snakes. Do you have snakes where you're at?
Oh yeah, but you guys have snakes there, and the difference is you can't see them.
That's
They're,
true.
here, the one thing that's really nice about the desert is the ground is very open. So for the most part, if there's something in front of you, you can see it. And then, we do have rattlesnakes, which are our most common dangerous snake, but they generally will warn you before you step on them. Like I was out hiking last spring and with a friend of mine, and all of a sudden, like this huge loud, like it's very loud, jarring sound comes. And we were probably about 15 feet away from an enormous rattlesnake who had curled up under a bush. We never would have stepped within striking distance even of him because of where he was, but he let us know. He was like, "Hey, back off." So,
Mm.
yes, we have poisonous creatures here. I wouldn't say you really run into them all that commonly, and generally when you do, they're very visible. Whereas, I grew up in Florida, and there you can like reach your hand under a bush and something will get you, you know.
That's true.
So,
Yeah, a lot of overgrowth and ivy and all that here for sure. Well,
yes.
I'm so glad to finally meet you in person here, so to speak, and through Zoom. But we'd love to invite people to tell their stories. If you could, take us back. How did your worldview get shaped as a child, and how did it evolve over the years?
Oh, that's easy to share. Um, so I grew up in a home. My mother was a Catholic from birth, and she actually was born and raised in India, in Bombay, which is now called Mumbai. But when she was a child, it was known as Bombay. And her mother was British and her father was Sri Lankan. And so she was raised there in a, in her home, but also she attended school in a convent, at a boarding school. I think that was kind of common at that time. She was born in 1937. So,
Mm.
back when things were very different than they are now. But so she was raised in that convent school and she did her entire education there. And when she eventually arrived in the States, she had maintained her Catholicism. And by the time she met my father, she was 35, or at least she was 35 when I was born. And my father, I would say he was, believed the family religion was Methodism. They're New England folks from a variety of areas in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, that area. So he wasn't, I guess, just as he wasn't as eager of a religious follower as my mother was. But my mother was very dedicated to her Catholicism. And so when I was little, we went to Our Lady of Fatima, I believe it was, in the little town of Homosassa Springs, Florida, where I grew up. And I can remember going and sitting in services. They would have the children come down front and we would sit. And one of my funny memories is going to the nun and asking for a donut because she would always be selling donuts as a fundraiser for the church. And I never had any money because we were pretty poor. And so I'd be like, please, can I have a donut? And she'd be like, no, you have to have a quarter. That was one of my little early memories of like, those Christian people are not nice. Just
Wow,
like, I want,
that's harsh.
this little thing. So I remember that. But then when I was 5 or 6, my parents were invited to a charismatic church service, like a revival type service. If you're familiar with the charismatic movement, they have those, week-long events where they're having like a drive or a tent revival kind of thing. And so they were invited in to one of those that was in the next town north of us. And they went and they had an experience there. And my father actually had an experience prior to the service that he tells of having been in a truck driving home and something landed on the top of his truck and suddenly he got a vision from God and believed that he needed to attend this service and all of that. So anyway, they went and they got involved in the charismatic church. And very quickly, one of my first memories of faith and thinking about like relationships with people was my mother was kicked out of the Catholic Church because she went to her Catholic church and she began raising her hands, because
Oh no.
charismatic. And they were like, no, you can't do that. So that would,
Oh,
that would have been in the 70s, in the early 70s or mid 70s, I guess. And
I can understand, but it's kind of sad that they would discourage her fervor.
yeah, and there was a charismatic Catholic movement, I think, at that time that was happening, but they hadn't reached Homosassa Springs, Florida. That's all I can tell you for sure. And so, in hindsight, I look back at my mom and I realize my mom was just a very demonstrative person. And so I think that she gravitated to whatever, like, very overt demonstrations of whatever was important to her. And which incidentally, I am very much that way now. But as a child, I was horrified by it because it got things like you kicked out of church. you know? But so anyway, she And my father stopped going to that church, and they found this little tiny church called Bethany Fellowship that was in Lecanto, which was another little town nearby, fairly nearby our home. And we started going there. And that fellowship was probably maybe 50 people, very small. And it was one of those kind of churches that was not a particular denomination, and the pastor and his wife's home was right there on the same property. And after services, everybody would go over to Lyle and Shirley's house and have a meal, and there was a big pear tree out in the parking area, and we kids would always pick pears during pear season. And I remember that church as a wonderful time of, it really was a fellowship. We were friends with everybody in the church. The kids, and we would all have like ghost stories while the parents were in meetings having whatever religious experiences they were having and we weren't interested in. I still can picture like the Sunday school room with the felt boards and, all the little felt figures, and
I used to love those.
Right? They were so much fun. Simon Says, and, all of those things. So that was a very formative experience for me that was really good, because we did things together as a group a lot. There just were many, many regular events, Christmas events and harvest events and swimming parties at somebody's home and all of that. And then that pastor and his wife decided to move north to the Swanee River. And so the church shut down. They didn't like try to find another pastor. And I don't, probably there were things happening that I had no idea of as a child. So the pastor and his wife left, and they started a fellowship up there in the Swanee area. And it was like an hour and a half drive from our home. And so they would invite everybody from the fellowship to come up once or twice a year and have a big family party, where we would swim in the river and, eat delicious food and all of that. And so we continued that with them for at least a couple of years. And meanwhile, we attended a different charismatic church called The Word in Crystal River, which was another town. It's back east, like how it is back east. All little towns are like clustered together. So we went to that church, got involved there, and that went on for, I think we were probably there for a couple of years. Well, one of the things that was really formative in my life was I had this piece on the one hand where my mother and father were very involved in the church, and my dad was a vocalist and he loved to be involved in the choir, and my mother was just I think what I would say about her now is that she just was a very devout person in general. So whatever she was focused on, she focused hardcore. So between the two of them, they just were very committed to the church at that point in our lives. But on the other hand, my mother was mentally ill. And so she, at the time, had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia.
Wow.
And yeah, so that was tricky. At this point, it's hard to know, like, where was the disease? Where was the religion? Like, some of the stuff was, I think, kind of overlapping. But what that ended up resulting in is she really gravitated to the odder sides of charismatic focus. So she became more and more focused on demons and, casting out demons. And she did a lot of praying in tongues, like just everywhere that you went.
Was she thinking like her schizophrenia was related to the demonic activity?
Well, she didn't admit that she had schizophrenia. So,
okay.
Which is a common problem. If you have schizophrenia, it's very common that you don't see it that way, and you see everybody else is seeing things wrongly, and you're the one who sees them accurately. So hard to say. But in the end, it resulted in some odd experiences for me as a child, because I remember like an ambulance would go by and she would start, you know, and you're just like, whoa, mom, you're being really weird. And if you were out in public, she wouldn't hesitate to do those things also. And so then everybody's looking at you weird. You live in a small town, you know.
Wow.
It's it's an interesting thing. And
I'm sure it's funny looking back at it, but I'm sure it was embarrassing at the time. Crazy.
that was horrifying. Yeah, it was. And all that to say, like, I've painted a picture on the one hand of my family having some really strong qualities. Also, we were a disastrous mess in many other ways. Extremely dysfunctional. My father was abusive. My mother was abusive. My sister was abusive. There were things. So, but you know, when you're a kid, it is what you know. And so you don't realize how bizarre it is. But I think now looking back that people who knew us must have done a lot of tittering and like, oh my gosh, those people over there, they're really, really weird. Because we were.
As you're painting that picture, could I ask, what were the churches you were attending evangelical in the sense of not the name evangelical, but just that they were preaching the gospel? Were you hearing the message of Jesus' death and resurrection?
Yes, absolutely. They were very I think most charismatic churches are this way, but they were very much about you must be born again. You know, there was a lot of focus on Christ has come to set you free from your inherent sinfulness. I think that was like the probably one of the things that I picked up from the very beginning, is that you can't be okay unless you accept Jesus as your savior. And so I did the thing that you hear people talk about a lot, of rededicating my life to Jesus every Sunday, because every Sunday the pastor would give an invitation and you could never quite be sure, did I do it right? Or was I sincere enough? Or, you know, well, this week I ended up doing some things that I think might be a little questionable. So possibly I need to re-up, you know?
Were they painting the picture that you could backslide and even lose your salvation if you got too far gone from the focus of Christ?
Definitely they talked about backsliding. I think as a child, I was not aware of the idea of losing salvation. Here's the thing that I remember most like that just took a big space in my mind, was the types of churches I was in were really focused on the end times. And so there was a lot of conversation about, if you don't accept Jesus, then you will go to hell. And also, Jesus is coming back, and that could happen at any moment. And if you're not right with Jesus, then you're going to get stuck here. And there's still a way that you could possibly get into heaven if you get left behind. But you should know that you're going to go through torment in that interim. And I think about it now and I just go, good Lord, what were they thinking to say this stuff to kids? But they would tell you stuff like, you're going to get nails through your tongue if you speak the name of Jesus after Jesus has come the first time. That's the one thing
Wow.
that, like, in my head was, my tongue was going to be nailed, which, you know, as a child, your concepts are so confused anyway. But like, I was always afraid of getting my tongue cut out or nailed or something along that, which is just so gruesome. And
That's intense. I feel like I've been exposed to a lot, but I've never heard that one before. That is crazy.
I'm gonna guess that was maybe a unique feature of my particular church, because I remember hearing it a lot, the threat of your tongue specifically is going to be removed from your body or harmed in some way if you don't say the right things at the time of the rapture. So
We had one that was kind of similar, where they painted the picture. I don't know if it was from a book or a movie, and this is why I heard it recurring, but they said people are going to come into the church with guns and they're going to take like any pictures of Christ that might be on the wall or whatever, or the Bible. They'll put something on the ground and they'll tell you to spit on it. And those of you that spit on it can live. Those of you that won't spit on it, they're going to kill you right away. But it was very similar in the sense that torture is coming your way for sure.
Oh, wow. Ugh, yeah. I mean, I think we had similar things to that too, of that it would be other people, yeah, meting out this terrible punishment on you for, not being right. But that was all in the context of, well, you didn't get raptured in the first place because you didn't do it right the first time. So, now I guess you still can, but you have to go through this terrible, awful time of tribulation.
Yeah. So get in quick before it's too late.
Yes, yes. And I don't think that anybody thought we want to scare them into the kingdom of God in an intentional way. But I think that people really are afraid when you are in that kind of a community. You're afraid for people who don't believe like you, that this really is what's going to happen to them. And we tell everybody, look, if you don't trust God, there's only one way into heaven, and that's through Jesus Christ, his son. And if you don't call on the name of Jesus, then you're going to go to hell when you die. And that gets said again and again and again and again. And so you don't even question it. Like when I was a little kid, I didn't even think to question that. I just, like, this is reality. This is what will happen if you're not, in with God. So now I just think about how naive you are. I was recently with my grandkids out. We were hiking, and this is not related to Christianity per se, but I was hiking with them, and I happen to be a real lover of moss. I just really get excited when moss is growing, which is not a common thing in the desert because it's very dry here. And so when there are places where moss is growing, it's like, oh, wow, look at the moss, And so I'm out hiking with them. And in this time of year, if you're in the right place, you can get actual streams that run, crystal clear, beautiful little creeks. And so we go out this time of year seeking those because it's a rare thing. I know, like when you live back east, there's creeks everywhere. Here, there's not. And so anyway, I was taking them on a hike, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I got to show them the moss. And so I showed them the moss. And after that, like every 2 seconds, they were like, Ushi, here's more moss. Oh, look at the moss over here. Oh, this is a lot of moss. And they were like so excited. And it hit me really, really strongly how you give children this much information and it becomes this huge thing. Like, you can influence what they're interested in and what they love with a moment. And like, if you don't do that thoughtfully, it can be a real problem. So, thinking about that as a child, like one of the stories I remember with the flannel board, well, there's two that stick out in my mind that even as a little girl, I would say, this doesn't make any sense to me. And the first one was Noah's Ark, because they would tell the story of Noah's Ark, and my mind, and I would ask the question, but what about all those people who got left off of the ark? How, like, so they just were drowning, and and I'm picturing people in the water begging for help, and God just saying, no, I'm not going to help you. And then, because I have a very graphic imagination, I'm imagining they're rotting in the water. And because I grew up on a farm, so I was used to seeing what happens in real life. I lived in the woods, and so we would go and find carcasses and things, so I understood that when things died, they got stinky and nasty. So that one just really disturbed me. And I don't remember explicitly what was said when I would ask that, but I remember the question never was answered. It's just, oh, let's talk about other things now. Rainbows. Yeah. There's a rainbow. Jesus came, and now there's a rainbow. And the other one that really bothered me was Abraham and Isaac, when Abraham was asked to sacrifice him. And I was always like, but that doesn't seem right to me, that God would ask Abraham to sacrifice his son, because we don't think that's right now. Like, you don't ask people to kill their kids. Like, that's not okay. And and they use those stories as regular children's flannel board stories all
Yeah.
the time. They're
Well,
supposed to be.
it's very astute that you would pick up on that though at that age. That's most of us don't pick up that that's such a horrible story or a set of stories.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there were other things too that I think I, as a child, would just go, huh. But I was also, and I think probably due to the instability in my home, I was always looking for how could I be a good girl and how could I, fit in properly. And I had, when I was 3 years old, I had a car accident that caused my eyes to become crossed. So I endured quite a lot of teasing from schoolmates and so forth. And so from a very young age, I always felt on the outside anyway of groups of children. And so I think one of my coping mechanisms as a child was to, even if I had like questions where I was like, what? I was always the teacher's pet. I was always like trying to learn more things. I was always the kid who knew all the books of the Bible, could find every reference. We would play this game called Draw Swords. And I would always be the one who would whip out the Bible verse right away. I mean, I was very, very astute at all of that, good Bible girl stuff. I went to a private Christian school starting when I was 9. And so, we had regular Bible training and Bible memory and, chapel every morning and all of that. So I was very much saturated in Christian culture from the time I was a very small child. And I don't remember until I was 14 any point at which I wasn't involved in church all the time. And so my whole worldview was Christianity is real and true and necessary. And I would talk to random people about Jesus because that's what you were supposed to do. They would always tell us, like, you need to witness because otherwise people are going to go to hell. So you better, go out there and spread the gospel. And so it's like, oh, I'm going to go and, I'm going to help people know Jesus. And I wouldn't say that when I was a child, I felt that I knew Jesus anything like what I later came to understand that as, but I tried. And the one thing that I'll say that I specifically did regularly after my father left, which happened when I was 9 years old, and my siblings also left at that time, was my mother became increasingly unwell. I was, living with her. She did not have enough money. My father paid like $200 a month, and that's what we lived on for a long time. She would occasionally get a job caregiving in somebody's home, but she would pretty often end up losing those positions because she was off. So I would pray nightly at begging God, please make my mom well. And as I look at that now, I realize it's because I was scared because I didn't have my basic needs met. I didn't have enough food. I didn't have enough clothing. We lived in a home that was infested with, if you can imagine, opossums, because it was a mobile home and nobody was caring for it or maintaining it because it how things are in the South. They don't hold up.
Yeah.
Unless you have regular maintenance. And there was nobody maintaining for us. And so anyway, I was definitely in a poverty state as in my adolescence, and I was terrified. So the only thing that I knew to do, because I had tried to ask my father for help in my childish way, and he was not interested. He was doing his own thing. And I tried to ask my older siblings who were 6 and 9 years older than me for help, and they didn't want anything to do with our home because my mom was very hard to be around. And so it was just me and my mom and the people in the church. I mean, in theory, the church would support a family. That was part of what they're supposed to do. But I don't remember ever feeling like that is what happened in any sort of tangible way. I mean, there were times that people left groceries on our doorstep, or we did often end up having lunch at somebody's home on Sunday afternoon so that we could then stay in town and then go to church the next service on Sunday evening. So that happened, but
Hmm.
I can just remember crying, literally tears, begging God to please make my mom well, because because we weren't okay. And
Well, that's traumatic for a kid to go through. That's crazy. That's heartbreaking to hear it. Before you go into the next part of the story, I just wanted to go ask a quick question about something you said before. Um, you mentioned that you would go kind of rededicate your life, or there's an altar call, and you'd go up over and over week after week. Did that ever kind of ease up where you kind of felt like you knew for sure you were safe and secure in the loving arms of Jesus, and that maybe you could still rededicate your life in the sense of saying, God, I'm definitely yours, but I just want to make sure I'm crystal clear, like I'm renouncing sin and my life is yours. I'm fully in love with you, and do with my life as you will. But like, was there a point at which that just the fear, like I might not be really right with God in the biggest sense of like I'm definitely going to go to heaven when I die, did that ever die down, or how did that work?
well, in my childhood, I would say no. And what I would have said at the time, if somebody had asked me a question like that, was, well, I'm really rebellious. So I was, on the one hand, very like into the Bible and into knowing the answers. But if I'd had a choice, I wouldn't have gone to church all the time, because I didn't feel accepted there, by my peers in particular. I felt accepted by the adults, but my peers made fun of me and generally avoided me. I didn't have close friendships with any of them. I spent a lot of my early life as an outcast in many ways, for a variety of reasons, but some of them I've already described. So, when you're a kid, you just want to belong. You just want people to like you. And I just always felt on the outside. And I think that led me to things like, we had neighbors who lived right next door to us who were absolute heathens. My mother hated those poor people, just hated them. And they were heathens. She was not wrong. They were despicable people. But they let me into their home and they plied me with cigarettes and alcohol and all manner of unsavory things. So I don't think that I ever felt safe, because I was being influenced in these other ways um, to do things that were not Christ-like, and I knew that they were not Christ-like, but they were places where I felt accepted. And so I continued. And I had friends. I had one friend that I can remember who was like, she was proud of saying that she had been a gang member in Fort Lauderdale when she had lived there, and she had moved up, and she would always tell us all her stories about her gang activities. And
Hmm.
I felt cool being around her and drinking on New Year's Eve at 12 years old, stupid stuff like that. So no, it didn't. But also, I was not at that point in my life like truly pious.
Yeah, it sounds too like you had so many distractions. Like, and I was just thinking, in my background, like everything was just, it wasn't like it was a great background in the sense that there was no trauma. There was trauma, there was abuse, but like there was still like everything was just God, God, God. Whereas it sounds like you had a lot of God, but also some really big stuff that just kind of overshadowed that. And in some ways, I just wanted to make sure I added too in that context. It's so cool though that you were able to see through some of those stories, because as you were telling how you could pick up that some of these stories were wrong, I was just thinking, I never did that. Like I was just like, hey, this Kool-Aid's great, give me some more. And I never questioned the narrative as far as I can recall till I was 43 years old, like not once. And it's so cool. I'm so amazed and kind of jealous that some people saw some, I mean, even if you didn't do anything about it at that age, because you were, too indoctrinated otherwise, just to look back and say, I'm proud of myself. I had the wherewithal as a young child to say that doesn't make sense. Cause that's basically what this whole deconversion is all about. Is like, wait a second, this worldview doesn't make sense. You were starting that at so young in some ways, which is just, it's such a brave and powerful thing to do. I'm very jealous of it.
Well, don't worry, I drink plenty of Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
We'll get to that, Tim. So what I want to say, kind of just to go back to that, because it'll very briefly it'll tie in later, is that those early years in evangelicalism for me were in a more or less egalitarian environment. They still had the concepts of the father as the head of the household, but they had invited women to teach and preach and lead worship and do all the things from the front. You would have women revival pastors coming in and giving talks and things like that. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because next, when I was, so in between, like when I was like 9 to 14, I was saying how my mother, was mentally unwell. Well, she deteriorated and deteriorated and deteriorated to the point where it could no longer be denied that I could not live with her anymore. And I think just from a functional psychological standpoint, I was very traumatized during that time, because it was very frightening to be a child in a situation where your only safe person is not even slightly safe. And that's a whole nother story, which we don't have time to get into, but you can just kind of imagine whatever sort of trauma that I would have had during that time. So when I was 14, some family friends finally intervened and got my father, who was at that time had moved to Arizona, to let me come and live with him. So in August of 1986, I was flown to the Tucson airport, got off with my single suitcase of belongings, which I tried to shove everything I possibly could into my one suitcase, everything that mattered to me and that I still had access to, and came here to live. And my father was very eccentric at that point in his life. Well, he probably always was, but I didn't know how eccentric he was. He lived out in a place called 3 Points, which is 40 miles west of Tucson, in the foothills of the Sierra Mountains, with no running water, no electricity, in a mobile home. And he lived there with his girlfriend and her daughter at the time. They were shacking up because he was an ungodly man at that point. He's had 6 wives. He actually passed away this last year, but he was very prolific in wifery. And so this was wife number 4. He ended up marrying her eventually, but at this point he was not married to her. And so I lived with them in sin, in the den of iniquity, with no running water or electricity, and started my high school career 2 days after I arrived in Tucson. Got on a bus that took an hour to get to the school that our community had all of its students attend at that point. And there was a lot of trauma involved in my school experience. So I spent 4 years, again, as an outcast, but in very different ways at this point, and with no religious instruction or involvement whatsoever during that period. So Dad just had not any interest whatsoever in church. I think I only ever stepped foot in a church during that part of my life one time, when I went with one of my girlfriends. I spent the night at her home, and she was a Seventh-day Adventist. And so we went to her Seventh-day Adventist church, which was weird as fuck. Am I allowed to cuss?
Yeah, that's a great. Yep.
And
do you remember how weird, like what was weird about it, or just the whole thing?
I mean, they were, from my perspective at the time, so we were very, very much taught about all the other Christian cults when I was a kid. So like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and the Way International and all those groups. Those groups were all wrong. And a lot of them that had in common the things of like, we don't celebrate holidays and we don't celebrate birthdays and stuff. That's what I remembered about the Seventh-day Adventist thing, was like, there just seemed like way more rules even than what I was used to. So I was just like, why would you ever want to be a part of this? You can't even have a Christmas gift. This is terrible.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
I don't
So,
know too much about them, but I've heard a few things. I did interview somebody from that denomination quite a long time ago, years at this point, but which is crazy that I've been doing this that long. But I do want to at some point learn like what they actually believe, because I've heard some and plus their origin story with who is that lady? I forget the lady's name that like had prophecies or something. It's definitely a different. It's sort of like a cult, but there's some good people in it. Like I would have, as a Christian, I think I would have called some of them close enough, but I'm not
hmm.
sure. It's definitely right in the middle.
Yeah, and I think in my more recent years, I don't think we called Seventh-day Adventist cultists, but it's hard to remember now. So anyway, so I didn't do anything. This was the 80s, okay? So keep that in mind, the 80s. Drugs, sex, and rock and roll. That's what I did for like 4.5 years. I just was wild. I did
Hmm.
everything I could do. I smoked as many cigarettes and as many joints, and I tried all the drugs, and I, you know, got hookups with as many different people as I could find. And it's interesting to me now. I had one friend in particular in high school who she was a very pious Christian girl, and she kind of stayed with me the whole time, and I would be like crude and just rebellious, and I think in hindsight I was like goading her because she was very pious, and she would never say a cuss word, and she looked the part of the good Christian girl, and she really did behave that way. And so I would just be snotty to her. And this one time I actually said something crude and vulgar to her, and she's like, "I'm gonna smack you if you talk that way anymore." And I was just like, "Oh yeah, okay, I'll stop." Like it did give me pause. But one of the things that I realize now is during that season, I was a good student. I was really intellectually engaged in a lot of what I was learning. I loved my writing classes, and I loved government class and American history. And I had a couple of teachers who were they started a support group for sexual abuse victims. And so I got involved in that, which was really, really important for me. It was the first time in my life anybody had heard my stories and like listened and gave them credibility. And so all of that formed to, I would say it caused me to take on what I would now characterize as a democratic sensibility in terms of politics. So I studied the system, and I had developed this idea that I wanted to become a lawyer. And the reason that I wanted to become a lawyer is because I wanted to be the president. And I wanted to be the president because I wanted to change the world, because I saw that the world was broken and I didn't like it. And I thought I can do something about that. So I had this whole idea. And I think now, like looking back, it was because I had seen so much pain and heartache and trouble and poverty and all of that. And I said, I'm not alone. I know there's other people who've got it way worse even than I had it. And what can I do about that? So I was like pro choice, and I was pro at the time, what would we have said? Pro gay, I guess. Just pro free love. Like I just thought like everybody should be able to do what they wanted to do so long as they weren't hurting other people. And all of that was kind of formed during that time, and it was in opposition to these certain the forces that I'd had forming me earlier on, and to my friend who was a very pious Christian, and I had this other teacher also who was a very strong Christian. And I was always like, I look back now and I realize like I was always the one who's going to be in your face about whatever I thought you were wrong about. Like if I thought you were doing something to oppress people, I was going to be like, let me just talk to you about that. And so, like I can remember in high school doing speech and debate class, and my topic that I chose for that, my big project was pro-choice. And this was in the class with the very, very Christian teacher. So
Oh wow.
she must have hated it. And I recall like it was said that I lost the debate, and I was like, the fuck I did. Like I want it fair and square, but you don't like it because you don't want to hear it.
Mm.
Um, so that was that period of my life. And then, you can imagine it was tumultuous in terms of all of my various liaisons that I made at the time. And I married a man who was a big jerk. And then I quickly divorced him because he was a big jerk. And then I went even more hog wild than I had been before and dated everybody I could find and all of that. And one day I met this dude who just about caused me to die on sight. And that was my husband, Jeremy. I looked at him and I was like, holy cow, that guy's amazing. I don't even know. I mean, I think it's kind of comical now because I don't necessarily believe in love at first sight as a general thing, but I definitely had it when I met Jeremy. And I went home and I told my roommate, I'm going to marry that guy. And here we are 32 years later, and we're still married. And so
cool.
Right? I mean, it really was. And I mean, we were so dumb. We were the how we ended up getting married was I got pregnant really fast, within 3 months. How I never got pregnant before that is anyone's guess. That I totally should have, but I didn't. And so we got pregnant, and his family were very evangelical, and he wasn't particularly focused on that at all at that point in his life, because obviously he was out there having premarital sex, willy-nilly. And he didn't, he would never have said that to his parents, but he was happy to do it. So anyway, so Jeremy and I end up getting married, and he was very different from the sort of guy that I had ever dated before. I had dated big time losers, if I'm being totally honest. They were not good guys. And Jeremy was other than the fact that he was not really into Christianity, he was a straight and narrow kind of guy. Just very conservative in his appearance and his way, his outlook. He's an engineer, just a very linear, analytical thinker, extremely easy-going. So I hadn't actually met Jeremy's family, and we had made a plan that we were going to spend Christmas holidays together. After Christmas holiday, his family was going to go visit his family, and then they were going to come back home. And he lived in Flagstaff, which is Winterville for Arizona, and it's wonderful. And so he and his family invited me to come up to stay, and I was going to do that. And then on the 21st of December, my sister committed suicide, and she had been ill for most of her adult life. She's, as I said, 6 years older than me, so she would have been 25 at the time. She had honestly attempted suicide many times prior to that, but this time she had a gun, and so she was successful. And because my family is the way it is, they didn't contact me until the 26th of December to tell me, after which time they had already had services for her and cremated her body and done all the things. And basically they just contacted me to let me know that it had happened. Of course, I was devastated, and I had only recently had an interaction with her in which she had begged me to come to see her in Florida, and I was a waitress at the time. I live in paycheck to paycheck. I couldn't afford a flight out, and I just was like, no, I can't. And so I ended up dealing with a lot of guilt over could I have made a difference if I had gone? Anyway, so I was absolutely devastated, and I had grown up with the belief that if you committed suicide, that was an automatic ticket to hell. And so that was a big part of my devastation was, oh my God, not only is she gone from this earth, but she's in hell forever, and I'll never see her again. And so I phoned Jeremy. His family had just arrived back home at 11 o'clock at night that night, and I had only gotten the phone call from my family a couple hours prior. Or no, that's not right. I think a day before. And so I'd had a good day to soak in all of that and be distraught. And so I phoned him and I said, can I come now? It was going to be a little bit earlier than I had been planning on coming. And of course, him and his family were like, of course you can, like, come as soon as you want to. So I drove through the night. I think I left my home at like 1 a.m. and drove. It was like a 5-hour drive up there. And arrived at like 4 or 6 a.m, still dark, and met Jeremy and his family, and they enveloped me in such kindness and love and support. And I had never met them before, and they just brought me in and hugged me, and at a time when I was extremely vulnerable and hurting. And they told me that no, Kim would not go to hell for having committed suicide. If she was saved, then she was in heaven with God, and he would understand her choices, and I didn't need to worry about that. And so that was the first time I'd heard theology that said anything other than you go straight to hell if you've committed suicide. And so that made me open to whatever they had to say about anything else related to God. And so 3 months later, we turned up pregnant. They again opened their arms and loved us, despite the fact that they were disappointed that that was the choice we had made. But they also acknowledged that they had had premarital sex, and that's a normal thing and whatever. And so they just responded in all of this love and acceptance, and it changed my life. It made me feel okay and safe. And so I spent many years in the fold with my husband's family, like running through all the questions that I always had. So those questions that I had from way back about Isaac and Abraham and Noah's Ark, and many other questions that I had, like about women in the church and stuff. We would have conversations about those things all the time. Like, I think I actually wear people out or a lot of the time, or have in the past, with all of my philosophical wonderings, because I'm just very philosophically inclined, just always asking questions about everything. And I've been that way. I can see now I've been that way my whole life. And so our relationship was very much built on asking questions, and they were not themselves inclined to ask those kinds of questions, but I think they viewed me as fertile soil to help and to, like, bring me into the fold. And of course they were hoping to get Jeremy and I to go to church. And after a couple years after our daughter had been born, we started to think, we probably should take her to church so that she can know Jesus. Not that we needed to go, but she did.
Yeah.
We just had those conversations all the time. And I would ask questions that were difficult, and they would do their best to answer me, but they were actually pretty careful to say, we don't have answers for everything. And eventually, once we started going to church, I began to, gain some other resources that I could have these conversations with. It didn't wear out my in-laws quite so much. And now I would begin having these questions with people in the church. Maybe it was the women's ministry leader, or like when I was 25, I went to the administrative pastor, and I went to a Calvary Chapel at that point. Very, very large church here in Tucson, like 5,000 people, kind of large. And I had to sit down with him about Deborah in the Old Testament, and how God had called her to be a judge. And why, if God called Deborah to be a judge, couldn't God still use women in the church today? I see this now as very formative. His response to me was extremely dismissive. And what he said was, well, that's just because there weren't any men willing to step up. And the Bible doesn't actually say that. That's not what it says. But there's some things that you could make it interpret that way if you want to, which they did. But that always, just would always sit in the back of my mind and bug me. And at the same time, I had gotten involved in worship ministry, and I loved to sing. And so I was regularly on the stage, probably most weeks, worshiping. And that really fed my soul. And I would say now that music is extremely emotive, and it moves people. And I was moved by the music. And then when I began using my voice and my physicality, my leadership skills came through, and I had that influence to inspire others through worship. And so I did that. And then we ended up leaving that church. Trying to remember if something specific happened. I mean, I think it was just I became disenchanted because I was involved with the leadership team, and I regularly was in the room with the pastor, and he didn't have the time of day for any of us. Like he couldn't talk to us, he couldn't look at us. He was very socially awkward. I look at him now and I think he's probably autistic, but I didn't understand that at the time. And I just took it as a slight and an affront that he didn't like me. And I just became disillusioned with that church community. So we were there for like 5 years, and then we ended up leaving, and we went to a very small church. And in that church, I was encouraged to lead Bible studies for the first time ever. And I was also invited to be a worship leader because they didn't have one. So I had opportunities there.
Was the leading the Sunday school intimidating, or did you feel like you were equipped at that point for it?
No, it was very intimidating. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. It was women's Bible studies that I was invited to lead. And it just was that they had a very small collection of people to draw from, and they saw leadership skills in me that I had, to that point, I hadn't recognized in myself, probably mainly because of trauma and a lack of support from my family. But they saw the reality of what was there, and then I started doing it. And then, once I started doing it, I fairly quickly realized that it was a good fit, that I could do this, that I enjoyed it, that I made people feel safe. And I really liked that. I really liked being a safe place for people to land when they were in a difficult spot, which in terms of women's ministry, that's a lot of what you get is women who are struggling in a variety of ways. And I had the opportunity to minister to them. That was the seed for me of leadership. And I was there at that church for like a year. And then my husband and I bought the house that we're in now, which was all the way across the valley. And it wasn't feasible for us to continue going to that church. So we had to find a new church. So we found a new church, got involved there. And again, very quickly, I got on the worship team. I got involved in leading women's ministry. And within like a year and a half, I was the head of women's ministry there, because the pastor and his wife actually moved on, and we had a new pastor, and his wife was not a women's ministry person. And so they were very happy for me to continue. So I got to develop that ministry in the way I saw fit. Basically, one of the things that ultimately I think led me to some of my deconstruction is I was very, very focused on personal commitment to Christ and my own growth at this point, and various things that happened to me starting when I was at Calvary Chapel that really created a turnaround in me, where I had gone from kind of doing my own things, secular, normal American woman, to absolutely sold out for Jesus. And I now look at myself and realize I do that very easily. I'm kind of an all-in person. And so I went all in for Jesus, and I would read my Bible every day, and pray, and be constantly consuming various podcasts and radio shows back then. I listened to a lot of James Dobson. I read a lot of James Dobson. Who else did I get really sucked in? Paul Washer, if you've ever heard of him.
Yeah. I do know, unfortunately.
He's great.
Can I ask, where
Really,
was your husband with all that? Was he kind of going along with that, or is he on the sidelines?
Well, he thought he tends to go along to get along, like that's his personality. But I think a lot of it, he was like, "Oh, I don't know about, his analytical self he struggled with certain aspects of it, but he generally kind of followed along somewhat unwillingly. Just like, okay, well, he was very committed to the relationship and to the marriage. And so, he just kind of got brought along, and various people came into his life, and it inspired him in terms of, seeking Christ also. So he began to do more of that. We had so many late night talks in which I was like, you're not really saved. I really don't think you're saved because, and I would list out all the reasons why I thought he didn't really know Jesus. And,
Oh, no.
eventually I convinced him basically that was true. And he started to then pursue Jesus, at least to a level that I was more willing to say was acceptable. I mean, I was kind of a hard taskmaster, if I'm totally honest.
It's amazing the cringeworthy memories we can bring up from our past when we realize what we were doing back in those crazy days of Christianity.
Yeah. I mean, I was hardcore. I believed it. So,
Oh yeah, you have to. I mean, if it's true, then you have to try to save everybody you can, especially your loved ones. I mean, that's exactly what we all should have been doing if we were really believing that heaven was the gift and hell was the punishment.
right, exactly. So, I just got more and more and more fervent, and I would read every Bible study I could get. I had, 13 study Bibles, and I was studying in all the different translations in the original languages, and, just as close to being a Bible scholar as you could be without going to seminary. Um, and I wrote Bible studies for my ladies groups. I did I got trained in something called transformation prayer ministry, which is TPM, you may have heard it called. That's actually a really interesting therapeutic, I guess, intervention. It's meant to be an inner healing kind of thing. And the guy who founded it, his name's Ed Smith. I think he's probably kind of a deconstructed Christian at this point, but he's still a Christian. But he found that it didn't really fit well ultimately because it really did set people free. And so I got really involved in doing that. I did a lot of lay counseling. I got involved in regular lay counseling. So I had a lot of people that I was mentoring. I set up a mentorship program in our church and like connected people one-on-one as mentors and mentees. So I did a lot of like community. I felt my call was specifically to the church as opposed to as an evangelist. I really sought God to discover what it was I was meant to do, because the church I was a part of, the pastor was very, very evangelism focused. And he was always about, like bring people who are unchurched and let's get people saved. And I was looking at the body that I was serving and saying, these people don't reflect a transformative relationship with Jesus Christ as I understand it. And so how can they minister to a broken world if they themselves aren't really even interested in Jesus? That was the thing I was frustrated with, because it was true. Most people would come to church. They didn't really like worship. They didn't really like reading their Bibles. They didn't really like the sermons, but they kept coming, and their personal lives, which I was very enmeshed with because I was safe. So they would all tell me about their stuff, were a mess. So I was like, I don't think that Jesus is having the impact on them that he's supposed to have. And so how can we, I was really focused on how do we actually see people's lives transform? Because that's what the power of the Holy Spirit is supposed to be doing. And I'm not seeing it. Well, that did not win me any favors, Tim. Let me just tell you. Most people in the church, particularly the leadership in such churches, don't like to be told that they're not doing a good job.
Or imply that the gospel doesn't have much power.
Yeah. And so I became known in that particular congregation as a troublemaker.
Oh no.
Yeah, it happened. Because when I would point out the emperor was not wearing clothes is what happened ultimately. So we'd been at that church for 13 years. Jeremy had joined the elder board. I was the women's ministry director and very involved in the worship ministry. And they brought in a new pastor who was a worship pastor, and he and I just butted heads hardcore. Long story short, we ended up leaving that church, went to another church that some friends of ours had gone to that they were really excited about, and we got in there, and it felt like a gift from heaven. Like it just felt like God had moved us there, and we had been called to be at that church. They were into church planning. They were really into, I mean, they talked a lot about being really transformed, and the messages were geared towards how do we actually live out our Christian beliefs in the community and in our families and all of that. So I ended up getting really involved there. Again, I became one of their rotating worship leaders. We were involved in one of their church plants for a while, and then we ended up going back into the main congregation. The Jeremy was asked to be on the elder board again. I ended up with an office in the church that was mine for meeting with people and doing the TPM, Transformation Prayer Ministry. And so I had regularly scheduled meetings with various people throughout the week. Mind you, I was never paid a dime. That probably goes without saying, but I never had an official position. I just was that wonderful, godly woman who did everything that God called her to do with loving willingness, whatever. And so as we were there, one of the things that we liked about that body was when we arrived there, the pastor and his wife immediately recognized me for what I was, which was a leader and a dynamic personality. And basically they said, we believe that women should be able to teach and preach. And we want to invite you to participate in our preaching training classes that we offer. The next time we have one of those, we'll have you be a part of that, and so on. And so I was excited because they represented themselves as believing that women were, if not fully equal in the church, they were very close to equal. And they lied. There's really not another nice way to say that. When it came down to it, when they asked my husband to be an elder, the first question he brought up to them was, okay, so when does Ursula actually get to be part of this preaching training that you've been talking about? Because I had asked at that point probably 4 or 5 different times, so when can I join? And they kept saying, well, it's not the right time. It's not the right time. It's not the right time. Putting me off. And there's kind of a lot more I could say about that. But in the end, he and the rest of the elders had some meetings in which they put on the front of, let's have an honest look at what the scripture says about women's roles in the church. And let's all do that independently, and then we'll come together and we'll share what we find in the Bible and in, whatever references we gather. So Jeremy came home and he and I went on a hardcore study of what women's roles were in the church. And what we found after many, many hours of study was that it wasn't as clear as we had been taught. What we had been taught was that women were not allowed to teach and preach in the assembly. Certainly not to mixed groups. They could teach women and children, but not men. And what we found was that good Christian people and theologians around the world had always had a different opinion on that, and that it wasn't as settled theologically as we had imagined. So he brought what we found, to the eldership, and what he said to them was somewhere in there, he said, well, I don't think it's that clear that women can't be pastors or even elders. And that was the stopping point. They were very, very generous and open and kind and welcoming until he said that. And when he said that, they said something to him along the lines of, if that's your stance, then we can't continue working together with you, because that's unacceptable. And it was just like this hard bam, like absolutely not that, like anything but that. And so that kicked off a whole bunch of events, because up to that point, I had been happily serving and doing all the things that I was doing. And I wanted to teach, really what I wanted to teach was transformation prayer ministry, because women were benefiting, but not very many men were, because I couldn't get the message out. That was really it. I didn't want to like preach on the regular. I just wanted to teach about that. That pastor went home and told his wife about the conversation between himself and Jeremy and the elder board. And she began messaging me privately, scathing critiques of what a terrible Christian I was, and how I was being divisive, and how I was trying to destroy the church, and how dare I bring up these things, and how come I had never talked to her about any of this. And we had been very close friends prior to that. And I was just blown out of the water, because she just raked me over the coals and called me an ungodly woman. And I think it's very truthful to say that anybody who knew me would have described me as one of the most godly people that they knew. I mean, I was so completely in love with Christ, and would tell anybody of my love for him. And it was borne out in the way I lived my life. And anybody could see that. And so to be told that I was ungodly and divisive and power mongering was just like, what? So
Crazy.
part of my character is that I went in the next day and I talked to Pastor, and I said, it appears that the faith in me is gone. And as such, I'm assuming you want me to step down from all of my ministry capacities. And I'm really hurt, and I don't know what else to do here, but clearly you guys don't trust me anymore. So I guess you just want me to step down. And his response was, no, 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 not at all. My wife kind of flew off the handle. She's just kind of a pit bull. Like, she's going to apologize to you. Like, she didn't mean all of that and all of that. And I was like, and I should, a little background. She's actually a very kind of nasty person. And I knew that about her before, but I was generally pretty gracious, because we're supposed to be gracious. And so I was always defending her to other people that she had done that kind of thing to, which she did to me. I hadn't experienced that firsthand, but I'd experienced enough to be like, this is not the first sign I've seen of this. I was in her confidence. She had told me about her struggles. And so I just was like, yeah, she needs TPM like the rest of us. Like, we're all struggling. And I ended up meeting with her probably 2 weeks later, in which case she gave me a whole song and dance about how sorry she was about how she treated me that way, and la, la, la. And I said, okay, well, do you want to actually talk about this topic? Because you said I'd never talk to you about it, and that wasn't intentional, and I'm happy to talk with you now. She's like, no, 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 I don't want to talk about that. And I'm like, well, you accused me of not talking to you, and now you don't want to. No, I don't want to talk about that. I just don't want to talk about that. I don't agree with that, and I don't want to talk about it. Okay. So, so now I was on my guard, and I was just like, And we ended up having quite a few meetings with the pastor and the elder board and different things. And it's funny, actually, just this morning, I went and looked at some of the letters that I had written to the pastor and to the board and to individual members of the board at that time. Because I had viewed myself as a little bit unhinged. Because that's what they said to me and about me, was that I was unhinged. And I went back just this morning looking at those letters, and I went, damn, these were good. I mean, they were coherent, they were kind, but clear and direct. And I had done my homework. I had, I had clear points. And so in the end, what they did was ask us to leave the body because they knew that if we just stepped down from ministry, people would still come to us because we had demonstrated ministry capabilities. People trusted us. We were safe for people. They respected us, and and so they didn't want us there anymore, and we didn't want to leave. Like I was like, I don't want to leave. I love this. I love this. I love these people. I was a photographer. I had photographed several of their kids' weddings, like their babies, their, like, and for gratis, like I just did all of this for people. I love these people. Like I was deeply, deeply enmeshed with them. These were the people that I spent my life with, my days with. And they asked us to leave. And so we ended up leaving and still had a little bit of engagement with various ministry things that we did until I wanted to restore the relationship because we had considered the pastor and his wife our best friends, both of us. Like Jeremy was best friends with the pastor and I was best friends with his wife, and we were like, we love you and we want to restore this relationship. So my way of doing that was I laid out how I saw our relationship from the beginning and where I thought we had got off track and misunderstood one another. And I included in that, this is how I misunderstood you. This is how I think you misunderstood me, like back and forth. Well, I sent that to them, and that was taken as an attack, a personal attack. They told us never to contact either of them ever again. They blocked us on social media. They asked us never to email them, never to call them. They just completely shut us out of their lives. And then others in the church did so as well. And so we got essentially shunned. And that threw us, well, I'll speak for myself, that threw me into a tailspin because that was my entire life. And it ultimately also really ended up that Jeremy's family also rejected us for our new understanding of egalitarianism versus complementarianism. And which, do you know what that means?
I do, yeah. That sounds like they're trying to preserve the patriarchy in a sense.
Yes. And so all of our close relationships, I had 3 women in my life who I was really, really close to. 2 of them in different ways said, I no longer can respect you. I no longer can spend time with you. I love you, but I can't treat you like I did before. And so, and the one that was remaining, her life also blew up at the exact same time. So she wasn't really able to support me either. So I was in a very tangible way alone, and I had enormous feelings, and ended up like what I would say about that time is I am very grateful that I'm still alive, because there were many times that I thought I could just drive headlong off this cliff and be done. It was just so painful. I felt like what I believed at the time, because this is what people were saying around me, was it was my fault that all of this had happened. It was because I wanted to teach and preach, and that meant I wanted power and I wanted authority that wasn't mine, and I was harming other people. And why couldn't I just get along and, stop saying what I believed? And so I really did at points think the world would be better off if I weren't in it. And yeah, that was
crazy.
It was heart-wrenching. It was devastating. It was dark.
Can I ask, in that time frame, it sounds like the main issue was the issue of the patriarchy and the leadership of the church, etc. Was there any undercurrent of any other issues about the Christian worldview as a whole, or were you still like, no matter where I land with this particular church or set of churches, no matter where I land with egalitarianism, at the end of the day, I'm still absolutely solid with Christ? Was that there at that point?
Yeah. So Absolutely. I had no intention at that point of leaving Christ. I was 100% all in. And I would actually say that what kept me from ending my own life was the fact that I still believed in Jesus, and I still believed I had a purpose through Christ. And I was just trying to find my way to what that would be, while spiraling, alone, very alone. That's what I felt mainly, was alone, but still, I would talk to Jesus constantly during that time. So it's interesting to me now because I held on to that for, I think like at least a couple of years. But what happened was, because I had no physical people in my life, I sought out connection with people that I found in various Facebook groups online. And there were a number of different ones, and each of those led me to other ones. And so how I ended up to where I'm at now is just the path of hearing different people talk and think. And what I did personally was that whole journey taught me to listen to my own voice for the first time and truly trust my own understanding of things. And as I began to do that, I began to realize I'd actually always had questions about certain things within the message of faith. Like one of the things that really bothered me was in the Old Testament law, where it talked about who could be in the temple and in which parts of the temple. And there were things like, if a man's testicles have been crushed, he can't be in the assembly. And I'm like, what? Like that does not make any sense. And so those
And
kinds
how
of things,
common is that?
I know, right? Like also, yeah. I just, all those things made me say some of the stuff is just jacked. And so then I started reading people like Scott McKnight, who had a really different outlook on kind of the whole trajectory of the Bible. I don't know if you're familiar with The Blue Parrot.
No.
It was a book I read, and it was recommended to me through egalitarian sources. He's a one that the egalitarians really like. And then I started reading N.T. Wright, and I found that theologians had vastly different opinions about most everything. Then I started reading Richard Rohr and found that there is this whole idea that original sin is BS, and this whole other idea of original blessing. And so like I started with just trying to grab hold of some new theologies, but as I kept doing that, I would never be quite satisfied. So one of the things that's happened to me at this point in my life is there's a lot of people out there who want to say things like the Bible doesn't teach an anti-homosexual perspective. And I just fairly recently, like in the last 6 months, I did some more study on that. And I'm like, I'm sorry, it does. I think it does teach an anti-homosexual perspective, as well as women should all remain virgins because they're property. And, also they should stay quiet for the most part. Like all of these things that people had tried to excuse, that they would say, well, the Bible has a lot of good things, but there's these parts that are a little bit confusing, but really, and I ultimately, what I found is under intense interrogation, none of it holds up. It's man's religion based on what the men of the time thought about everything, and a power structure that was created. And I think it's been manipulated over time during, various societal shifts, to say what people like, the whole thing about slavery. I think the Bible does condone slavery, which is bullshit. That's not a good thing, but I think it does.
Yeah.
And so to try to make the Bible say that it doesn't I just think it's intellectually dishonest at this point. And so I have come to the point now where I do not call myself an atheist, because I don't think I know. And I think to call myself an atheist, that means I know that there's no such thing as a God. And I don't feel that way. But I now feel free from God and from that belief system. And what that means for me is I get to think for myself. I get to choose for myself. I get to realize that the way I am and the way I've been kind to people and caring to people and have reached out to help people feel empowered and able to get out of difficult situations and all of those things, which has been a feature my entire life. I can remember it from my early adolescence being that way. That was never Jesus. That was me. That's who I am as a person. That's my character. And I think it comes from the fact that I experienced so many traumas, and I have compassion and empathy for people because it really sucks when you don't have support. So those are the conclusions that I've reached now. And my focus at this point in my life has been a whole lot of trying to unravel internalized misogyny. I mean, so there's the whole concept of patriarchy, which is obviously problematic, but I think a lot of women participate in that because they believe the message of misogyny internally. And so when I say internalized misogyny, I'm not laying that at men's door. I mean, there's issues there, but I'm saying we as women have to start believing something different about ourselves and our abilities and what we contribute to the world. And we have to recognize how we support that system of patriarchy if we ever hope to bring about a shift. So that means things like we can't be tearing other women down. We need to learn how to celebrate one another in sisterhood. And despite what the men around us are doing, hopefully some of them will join in that as well. But we can't be waiting around for the men to suddenly want to give up all of their power.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be great, and we could have a conversation about that too. But
it is interesting how many women you do see that are very proud to pass on the patriarchal perspective too. It's almost to the point where I would say it's disturbing. There's a group that I talk about quite a bit out in Idaho, but they're well known for sort of ultra patriarchy, but it includes the idea that things like there's no such thing as marital rape, and the pastor's wife is in that group is known for statement of a man is never trespassing in his own garden, meaning he's always free to have his wife. And like but you'd think that would be a group where you'd see a bunch of people having an outcry like, oh my gosh, we can't continue this. Like, yeah, there might be some older people that we're not going to change their minds, but for the sake of the next generation, like let's have a different perspective on this. But instead they're like doubling down on what the pastor and his wife and the leaders in that church are doing, so that it's like they're proud of it, and it becomes a protective thing. Like, if we don't do this, feminism is going to infect us, and we need to make sure that we're so strong against feminism. And I'm thinking to myself, you're some of you have little girls as you're in your family, like you're wanting to pass on to your little girls that men are always in charge, women are always submissive, women are, at least the implication of they're less important, and their voices are always diminished. In that group particularly, and others I've heard that the women need to vote just like their husbands, if they should be allowed to vote at all, according to some of them. And it's like, you want to pass this stuff on to your little girls? Like, do you not look in their beautiful faces and think you deserve better? But they just can't see it. They're like, no, we need to keep our little girls away from feminism because feminism will destroy our families.
well, the thing is, that's true.
It is true. Yeah.
It is true. And I think that's one of the places that we're struggling as a society to acknowledge. Yes, feminism will destroy those kinds of systems because they're broken and they need to be destroyed.
Yeah.
And it's really uncomfortable to think about what that means and how to actually live in a different way. And that whole process is going to be messy. I don't think we know how to do it now. I don't think any of us knows how to do it now because all we've lived in is a patriarchal society. And so, we have to acknowledge that it's a big area to explore as a society if we're going to get someplace different. I've often shared the quote where Ruth Bader Ginsburg, somebody once said to her, "You're never going to be satisfied unless there's 9 men on the Supreme Court." And she's like, or 9 women on the Supreme Court. And she's like, well, yes, I would like that. There's been 9 men. Why is it a problem for there to be women? and the fact that that question even gets asked at all, like, yes, and, but
Exactly.
but it does feel wrong to people, to envision women leading in a broad fashion like that. And why is that, for obvious reasons. But
We're
that's a
gonna
whole.
Yeah, it'd be a whole nother interview we could do. Could I ask, just because I know we've gone long here, I did want to ask a few final questions. What was your husband with your not the I know you're probably both aligned in terms of where you stood with that church story, but once you started deconstructing further, was he going along with you, or how did that relationships phase work for you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we were aligned about that story. I'm not sure how he would tell it now. It was extremely difficult for our marriage for a while. I think we are now in a great place, and we've been able to come through that. But there were some times where I wasn't sure we were going to make it because,
Mm.
as I said, he's a go along to get along kind of guy, and I'm a challenge everything kind of gal. And those two things can be hard to compromise on. So he has come along, and I think, I don't know if he would even use about himself the term deconstruct. I think he would use the term, but he would mean something different about it than I do. Part of our journey has been to learn how to let one another think a different thing, because we were trained in the one flesh means basically we think everything the same, and basically we think what he thinks. And I wouldn't say that's how it ever was, practically speaking, in our marriage, because I was the more philosophical one. And so in many ways, I did form a lot of our theological opinions as a couple. But he generally would come along, but he never does anything quickly. And I tend to be snap judgments. I'm very fast on my thinking feet, and he is much more of a deliberator. So one of the things I had to learn was to let him take the time that it takes for him to arrive at a place where he feels okay. And so I think in many ways our marriage is much stronger now than it was before. But it was tough because, it put all this stress on our family situations, and, we didn't have our regular friendship situations at all anymore. We lost all of our friends, our couples friends. We still haven't really got couples friends. And
Is he still a believer?
I don't think I don't think so. It's hard for me to say because he's not somebody who wants to say definitively
Okay.
what he is. So I'm not sure how to answer that.
Sure. No worries. Well, I do want to ask too, like, when you look back at all that, obviously so much trauma, some really hard memories to go through. But one of the things that I ask quite a bit on this channel, and I'm curious about in your case, is did you feel like you went through a phase at all where you were kind of brokenhearted at the loss, whether the loss of heaven or the loss of this sense of like there's a father looking down on me, caring about me, there's a plan for my life? Like what were the grieving processes for you, or the grieving points for you, once you got to a point of saying this worldview doesn't add up anymore?
Oh, I would say the entire process has been grief. I have grieved the loss of all of those closely held beliefs, definitely, because I as I said before, I was so zealous that I did pray without ceasing. That was my lifestyle. And so I no longer pray. Occasionally I will think maybe I should pray right now, and then I'll be like, I know, I think it's bullshit. So but but
Exactly.
I miss that because it was comforting, and I realized it, and now I think of it more as like it's a way of processing thoughts and feelings. But I definitely grieve that every holiday rolls around, and I grieve the lack of traditions. And now I'm like thinking about like what new ones should I start. It's been 6 years for us since that whole thing started. And I'm just now starting to go like, are there new traditions that I want to try? Because mostly I've just been like, I don't want anything to do with any of it. It's all stupid and I hate it, just like, because that's my go-to, is just to be angry, because angry is more protected than sad.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say I've absolutely I still grieve the friendship losses. I loved those people, and I still like, I just want to like hold their faces and be like, I loved you. How could you do this? How could you treat me like I was your enemy? And like, I think that pastor's wife, I still hold some secrets of hers that I've never shared with anybody because that's not who I am. And she treated me like a piece of dung, and I just,
Mm.
so I still have a lot of pain. It really does break my heart that people can be so cruel. It's also led me to believe more along the lines of, yeah, we really are animals and we're just all about survival. And that's why people do the things they do, because they feel they won't survive otherwise.
Yeah, very much so.
So
I was curious too, and I'll make this maybe my last big question, and then if you have anything else from your story you wanted to add on, feel free. I know you're involved in some Facebook groups where you post things, or you're interacting with other people. You've been doing that for a while, I believe. Have you noticed any trends in terms of issues that people tend to bring up, or things that they tend to grieve through, or just dynamics of shunning? Anything that tends to stand out that you see a lot that tends to be the source of just an incredible amount of angst for the deconverting community?
I think probably the most common thing that I see that really causes people so much difficulty is the loss of their family relationships, because it's really common for people that if you don't believe whatever the family believes in evangelicalism, particularly, um, then you're no longer safe in your family group. And so a lot of times the people who remain evangelical will say things like, we still love you and we still want you to be a part of the family. And of course, of course we love you and we'll always be here for you. But the reality is that they can't speak openly about their thoughts about really anything. Particularly if they're part of the queer community, that's a really, really big problem. Um, but it's not even just that, because in when you're in evangelical, everything is a matter to pray about, and everything is a matter of moral judgment. Like, everything that you do has the potential to be judged as a moral choice. And within a family, if you are constantly being judged, that's just hurtful and painful. And so people lose their entire support systems. And they really do express just so much intense loneliness, and that they don't know where to turn. And I see a lot of people wondering, should they renege on what they believe? Should they find a way to go back to being Christians just so that they can have those support systems again? You'll see people just very naively saying, if I just explain to my family what, happened, do you think maybe that they'll trust me and love me anyway? And for those of us who have been through it, we have to be honest and say, if they're deep into evangelicalism, no, they cannot, because you will taint them. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I see, and probably the second biggest thing that I see is the fact that Christianity is so at odds with science and academia, and people just get really, really frustrated with, I don't know what to believe, because on the one hand, the Bible tells me this, and on the other hand, reality tells me this other thing. And then you're just caught up in the ability to trust your own ability to think critically, I think. Which
Yeah.
I think is one of the saddest things, that your critical thinking ability is held hostage to evangelicalism.
Yeah, it's true. It's good insights. I've felt those things too, and seen them a lot as well. It's hard too, because you do have this, and this is a topic, just I'll just say this quickly because this will be a whole another presentation. But there's a whole subset of Christians too that are specifically, like, their ministry is to go after people like yourself and myself, and to say, no, the Bible actually is scientifically accurate. You've just been misinformed, but let me show you. And the way that they've debunked, for example, even stuff just within the Bible, of where we might say that these prophecies about Jesus aren't actually prophecies. They just kind of cherry picked verses and made the story of Jesus up. It's actually no, it's actually quite amazing, but Jesus did fulfill the prophecies. And so there are apologists of sorts trying to convince you and trying to pull you back in. And I think what's hard is you do see some people that are right in the middle where they're just like, I'm not educated enough on any of these topics to know. I just know I'm confused, and you feel really bad for them. You just kind of hope that they're going to get good information, not get suckered by the apologists. But then there's also the people where it's like I've seen too much. Like I can't go back. I couldn't go back if I tried to. I can't unsee what I've seen. I know this is number one, a really bad worldview. It mistreats women, mistreats homosexuals, on and on the list goes. And yet also I know it's mythology. I've done enough study in comparative mythology to know they made up the Jesus character from other Greek gods and so forth. I couldn't go back if I wanted to. I could go back to church and just sit there, but I'm not going to like actually mean it. And it leaves you in a horrible spot where you're just like, I can't, like my life is now brand new. And I know one of the groups that is
We're born again, aren't
born
we?
again. Yeah, I'm born again. And it's like, I can't go back. Just like Christians say, I can't, if I was previously, doing drugs and I was a prostitute and now I got saved, I'm not going to go back to that old life. I've been saved by Christ. Like, yeah, well, now we've escaped Christianity. We can't go back because we know it's mythology, and it leaves you in a bad spot. Like you said, you often do get the shunning from people, and a lot of relationships do break down. It's so painful. But I'm so glad, I was going to just add this. I'm so glad we live in the internet age, because imagine going through this and you can't talk to anybody about anything, and you have no idea how to ask anonymous questions or create connections, or maybe just everybody and their grandmother in your town is all the same religion. They're all Mormons, they're all evangelicals, whatever. And if you wanted community, you'd have to drive 500 miles away to find it. I'm so glad we live in this era where that's those barriers are broken down. But anyway, I know I'm again opening up a whole bunch of other topics we could talk about, but for today, was there any other insights or thoughts you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Well, I wanted to mention one thing just because you reminded me of it just now that I didn't share. But as all this took place for me in my life, one of the things I most desperately wanted was just to have conversations with people about all of this, and to I wanted people to come and challenge me. I wanted people to come and say, well, have you thought about this? Or I hoped people would care. And I was shocked to discover that pretty much nobody was willing to actually have a conversation with me. And I've seen people share on some of the groups that I'm a part of where they'll say, yeah, so and so sent me a big long letter and they wanted to talk, or I had a sit down with my pastor and whatever. And I didn't have that experience at all. And the conclusion I've come to is, if they think they can convince you, if they think you're gullible or naive or not strong enough to resist their stuff, then they will come and they will care about you. But if they don't think that, if they realize that you are a threat to their thinking because you might actually present good information, they will not. And on the one hand, that has sucked for me because I've just felt like people didn't care. And more recently, I've come to the conclusion that actually says something about my ability to think critically, and they know it. They know they are not a match to come against me and say you don't know what you're talking about, because I do. I have spent the hours studying. I do have references that I can share. So that just was an interesting thing that I think we all experience very differently. And I find it funny that I often wished, God, anybody would come and like have a conversation, and like of all the people that I knew, like none of them would have a real conversation with me about it. And I don't know, it made me sad.
If I could piggyback off that for 1 second, I think it's ironic and kind of cool from our side to think that when people like yourself and others that come on this channel and others like it come on and share your stories, that you're like the Christians were kind of, in a sense, maybe not directly, but kind of silencing you, kind of saying your opinion doesn't really matter. We're a bastion of truth. We're going to do our thing, and you're kind of sidelined. And for some people, I'm sure, especially before the internet age again, it was kind of like, put your tail between your legs and go walk away. Like, just go into the silence, and you're not important. But this day and age with stuff like YouTube and other platforms, you can go on and share your story. And while this little church wouldn't hear you, all of a sudden, like, I mean, some of my interviews, for example, and I know my channel's not that big, but some of my interviews within a month, they're hitting 10,000 views. And it's like, you end up having like somebody that's just, nobody knows them from anybody else. And their story is just their little quiet story. And all of a sudden, within a month, 10,000 people have heard it. And it just keeps growing from there. And you think your story is really powerful. And I love how platforms like YouTube end up creating sort of a democratizing your ability to take your story and have it really have a ripple effect in society, and people that otherwise maybe thought that they had no power, all of a sudden like, oh, my story can actually make a big difference. And I love that. It's such a cool dynamic.
Yeah, it really is. And yeah, I totally agree. And I am grateful, because I've often said, like, if I had lived 400 years ago or 300 years ago, I'd have been burned at the stake. I'm 100% sure that that's what would have been my end.
Yeah, hopefully we weren't living in Salem, Massachusetts at that time. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it just, you just realize so many of these things. So anyway, I gotta say, Tim, if you ever want to have another conversation, I feel like we could go and have more about some of these like side topics. It's been fun to kind of bounce things off of you. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I've got a lot of topical presentations in my mind I'm kind of thinking through, so I definitely will keep that in mind, and I'd love to have you back for sure. So
yeah.
I really appreciate your time today. I'll just wrap up then by saying, everyone, we've been speaking with Ursula Schneider. Ursula, thank you so much. Great to hear your story. Thank you for what you're doing for the community in general. You've been a blessing to me, and I know to a lot of people. If I can use, I know some people get triggered by the word blessing, and I'm sorry, but I still keep it. I think blessing is a good word for it. But you are helping a lot of people. So thank you so much for what you're doing, and great to hear your story today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and sharing all in the ways that you do with everybody regularly. It really makes a difference too.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again for your time today. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.